Hello and welcome to the Mr. 50mm YouTube channel. I'm a movie-tographer now, or maybe a videographer? Those don't sound right. I'll figure it out eventually. Anyways, I know this video has a bit of a clickbaity title, but hear me out. Ever since I got this EOS M mirrorless camera, I don't think I've taken any more than a couple test photos that were actually on it. As soon as I was able to, I installed Magic Lantern on this camera and basically haven't stopped using it in that mode for video since then. So yes, this is going to be a Magic Lantern video, and it'll be my take on it. Right off the bat, I'm just going to say we're not going to be really talking about the photographic capability of the EOS M. So if you like regular Mr. 50mm videos, I'll link to my playlists in the description below so you can see other reviews that are more what I'm used to doing. But this isn't because I think the EOS M is a bad photo taking machine. I actually think it's the contrary. It's actually pretty well done despite its small size, and I think overall it's fine. But with Magic Lantern installed, this camera transforms from a solid APS-C compact mirrorless camera to a ridiculously fun raw video shooter, if you're the right person, or if you're me, a broken person. So let's get into it. Right, so what is Magic Lantern? Well, it's an open source software that runs off the camera's SD card or CF card slot, depending on which camera you run it on, and it adds a bunch of features that Canon didn't have on its original firmwares. That's the Coles notes from the Magic Lantern website. But for the purposes of this video, and for most of the videos that are out on the interwebs, the Magic Lantern is the magical doohickey thingy that lets you record raw video and high-res video off of the EOS M, plus a bunch of other stuff. So just to be clear, this video is not a tutorial on how to use your EOS M. I'll link to a couple of those online, and I'll link to the build of Magic Lantern that I'm using for my EOS M. In my particular case, I'm using Danne's build. And I'm going to link to two YouTubers who I think have covered the EOS M in an awesome and informative and very pretty way. And of course, I'm speaking of Zeek, and the other one is Sergio Russo. They have a lot of very nice clips in their videos. They do the explainer for how to use your EOS M much better than I ever could. My favorite modes: the high-res 2.5K, 2.8K, 3K modes. So before we get into why I like Magic Lantern in general, I just want to go into the modes that I'm most enjoying using. The first of these is the high-res modes that come in 2.5K, 2.8K, and 3K modes. There's other modes, but these three are the ones that I'm using the most. These modes are sampled from the center of the sensor, and they're a 1-to-1 pixel read and record mode. So in this mode, you'll get your highest detail and resolution coming out of the video, and at times, depending on which mode that you choose, you can get pretty good raw 14-bit video. At other times, you might need to dial that down. We'll get into that later. At any rate, these modes do come at a price though: crop factor. With these modes, with the 3K, you're going to get like 2.7 times, and with the 2.5K, it's going to come out to around 3.3 times crop factor, depending on, again, the modes you're going to use. And by the way, if you do end up using the Magic Lantern build that I linked to, Danne's one, on the menu on the EOS M, it'll actually show you what your crop factors are when you're going into your various modes, and yeah, you'll get your information. But if you want to know what they are beforehand, before you install, I'll link to a forum post on the Magic Lantern website that has a bunch of the video recording modes and their crop modes broken down into a nice Excel spreadsheet-like thingy. Right, so before we move on, I'll show you where the crop mode is, or the crop factor shown in Magic Lantern, and hopefully you can see it. So there we go. Right, you can see I have the raw video option highlighted in blue, and beside the letter Q on the display there, that is your current crop factor. So I'm in the 3K 1:1, and you can see the crop mode is like 2.7-ish. The Anamorphic 5.2K. So this mode is named because the video is a 1 to 3 pixel binning. Essentially, what that means is that the vertical resolution is maintained, and the 3 pixels going across get binned into 1, conserving the exposure value at the cost of spatial resolution, from what I understand. And in the end, what this gets you is that in post, when the video gets de-stretched, you will get a 5.2K resolution. But it's not exactly true 5.2K, because the actual recorded resolution due to the binning is 1736 by 2214. And in post, it multiplies the 1736 by 3, getting you 5208 by 2214, 5.2K. This mode has the advantage of being the full width of the sensor, roughly 1.6 times for crop factor with respect to full frame. And I assume it's partly, pretty popular because you get the full width readout, but also it's a pretty good clickbait video title. But again, to be 100% clear, it is not recording 5.2K, it is outputting 5.2K from that squeezed footage. For context, the spatial resolution captured is roughly about 3.8 megapixels worth. The actual 5.2K, if it were actually doing 1:1, would be closer to 11.5 megapixels. For reference, UHD 4K is 8.3 megapixels. So the result is that the 5.2K won't be as sharp as modern output from like 4K cameras. But the output still looks very good, and since we're recording in RAW, you still get the flexibility of being able to grade it as such. You may have noticed there are a couple things bolted on my EOS M, and for the most part, almost all of it is 3D printed. So I'm going to go over them here and also link to the prints that I used to add to my EOS M. First, you might have noticed is the rear LCD finder. This is quite useful, especially when you're using the EOS M in bright light outdoors, since you might have noticed there's no EVF. It's also, again, because it's a magnified finder, pretty good at helping you achieve focus when you are manual focusing your scene. Second, you got this grippy thing over here, and it just gives the camera a little more perch. The camera on its own wasn't bad when you're using smaller lenses, but when you're using chunkier ones, it does feel unbalanced. And this screws into the tripod base on the camera. Third is that I am using an EF to EFM adapter, and mine is from Newer. And it also has a tripod socket at the bottom, which is good because it's going to get into the fourth thing that I bolted onto this camera. And that is the pistol grip that is screwed into the tripod socket at the bottom of the adapter. It makes holding the camera during pans and tilts more comfortable, and with larger lenses, because it's a little more forward of the camera, it's a little more balanced. A tinkerer's paradise and an excellent tool for learning. With Magic Lantern installed, the EOS M unlocks so many options and settings. And for those of you who want to just shoot and forget, I imagine looking at the menu for Magic Lantern might be a bit nightmare-inducing. But for those of you who want to explore the changes and just see what settings you can tinker with, this is a lot of fun to play around in. Plus, as I mentioned earlier, you get a lot of features that are not included in the original firmware on the camera. And that's what's great about Magic Lantern. Plus, nowadays, Magic Lantern is actually fairly well refined. There are now a lot of presets that are built into a lot of the builds that give you a more predictable output. Even still, with that, there's still a lot of tinkering to get things just right, to get recording times just long enough, and when you're using the camera, it honestly just feels like an adventure one way or another when you're digging through things, trying to set things up just right. One of the things you have to learn to balance in Magic Lantern is bit depth of your videos. By default, Magic Lantern will give you 14 bits of bit depth, but that's a lot of bits. And actually, in a lot of the modes, it's actually pretty stable. But in more demanding modes like the 3K RAW or 5.2K Anamorphic, 14 bits I find tends to be a bit too much, especially if you have to balance complex scenes. So in Magic Lantern, you can actually choose the bit depth you want to record, and you can go from like, let's see, 10 to 14 bits. Now, the nice thing about being able to choose your bit depth is that eventually it generally taught me how to gauge complexity of the scenes that I was shooting. And it generally gave me an idea of, or gave me an intuitive idea of what settings would work before I, just went to record and see if it did. But it took a lot of trial and error, and there was a lot of times where I'd set it up and just assumed it was good, only to realize that it was not, and the camera either just stopped recording or straight up crashed. Additionally, with regard to what you see on screen, the level of customization in Magic Lantern is actually insane. The amount of tools that you normally get that you wouldn't on a camera like this is nuts. And, obviously Canon wasn't ever going to give us everything. They like their cripple hammer. But things like focus peaking, zebras, false colors, waveform monitoring, and so many other things are available with Magic Lantern. And there's a page of options there. And, for those of you who are familiar with video tools, it's awesome. You just have them right there. But for those of us who aren't, it's really neat to have the ability to play with them and use them as we see fit. Without Magic Lantern, a lot of these more advanced tools aren't something that most people are going to be able to experience. Plus, if you noticed in the menu there, there is actually options within the options for the tools, so you can tweak each tool to work exactly how you want. Now, it's not just the recording options and these tools that got added, but there are just a bunch of other quality of life things that got added to the camera. And it's not just for video. There are also options to improve stills shooting. For example, you can see this screen right here. So you got things like intervalometer, bulb timer, you can get like audio triggering, motion detection, all sorts of stuff that, aren't available on the normal firmware. So there is still even a case for installing Magic Lantern, even if you aren't ever going to take video on the camera. Magic Lantern is not for the faint of heart. Everything in it has a price. So again, if you're looking for a grab-and-go setup and you've seen the EOS videos, maybe look again or look elsewhere. The firmware is amazing, and bar none, it is the cheapest way to get raw internal video with all the tools that you could ever need to record high-quality video. But again, it's going to make you work to get your video looking the way you want it to. There's going to be a lot of tinkering, and there's, again, other things to consider as well. Again, if you're looking at the EOS and you watched a couple videos, you might be expecting to go into this shooting limitless 3K RAW or limitless 5.2K or UHD anamorphic at 14-bit with no crop. Yeah, no dice. Think again. In this section, I know I'm going to mention it again, but the Magic Lantern software is a bit of a double-edged sword. When you shoot these video modes, you either have to deal with crops, bit depth, or your pixel binning. So you have to balance these three things, and if you don't get it right, the camera again will either straight up stop recording or just crash. So it takes a lot of time using the camera to get used to what will work and what won't. Again, even if you are using the presets. So yeah, things to consider. Also, do you like continuous autofocus? Well, if you do, that's not a thing that you're going to be using if you install Magic Lantern on your EOS M. This is kind of a manual focus situation. Not that the continuous AF on this camera was that great to begin with, but with Magic Lantern, you'll be doing without it. And are you used to things like auto exposure, auto white balance? Depending on which mode you are using, you might have to forget about that as well. When it comes to the more demanding video modes, one of the things that you kind of have to do is try to give the camera as much, or try to unload as many tasks off the camera CPU as you possibly can. One way to do this is to disable auto exposure, disable auto white balance, and luckily, if you're assuming that you're shooting Magic Lantern, you're probably shooting raw video, the auto white balance thing, not a big issue. Just correct it in post. But the exposure thing is a bit more of a learning curve. But again, you got tools in camera to help you figure out whether or not your exposure is good. And for those of you who want to maximize the absolute maximum potential recording times, you can also do things like disabling the info displays, disabling the draw altogether if you are, into that. But things get a bit janky when you try to optimize for, the longest record times or the biggest settings. So yeah, keep things in mind if you're considering the EOS M. The next thing that I want to talk about is SD cards. You need a speedy one, and it's got to be a UHS 1 card. Luckily, there is a list of known good cards, and I'll link to that in the description below. And one thing you'll have to get to grips with if you're not used to it is the idea that when you do get these cards, you're probably gonna have to enable SD card overclock, which might add a bit of unpredictability into the mix. Not all cards are going to respond the same, and not all record times are going to be the same for everyone. One thing I keep alluding to a lot is record duration. Again, this isn't more of an issue with the high-res modes and the more demanding anamorphic modes, but it's something that needs to be said over and over again. Since sometimes in a lot of the more clickbaity videos, they don't mention that at all. And I admit, I'm kind of new to this, so I'm no authority on the system, but, overall, this system, despite all the things you have to juggle when you're shooting it, it does take awesome videos. And usually, especially when you're starting out, that requires multiple attempts, multiple setting changes, and just lots of time learning the system. So just get ready to sink some effort into it if you are going to get an EOS M. Post-processing, another facet of this, Magic Lantern environment. Now, assuming that you are looking at the EOS M and Magic Lantern, you're probably already into grading footage and thus are not turned off by the idea of extra work. But even still, when it comes to the EOS M and Magic Lantern, you can't just drop the files into DaVinci or whatever program that you're using. The files that it saves are .mlv files, which need to be processed again into like a Cine, DNG, or something else, whichever thing that you want to load your, whichever file that you want to load in your video editing software. Anyways, for these additional steps to the workflow, you'll probably be looking at like using the big app for EOS M / Magic Lantern. That's the MLV app. There are other tools, but I'll link to that one below because it's the one that I'm currently using. On a side note, I actually really like editing the video files on MLV app. It just feels like you're editing a raw file, and I do really enjoy that. For those of you who are my viewers that are all about the straight out of camera look, sorry about this entire video. Anyways, when you're actually grading the footage, it's a lot of fun to see just how much flexibility comes out of these files. It's super cool. At least I find it super cool. Getting over the extra workflow though, to move your files into whatever editor that you normally like to use, you get, a lot of flexibility. It's honestly been a lot of fun, not just shooting, but also editing these files. It's, to me, worth the effort. But, enough of my rambling. Let's go see some of my clips. Again, by the way, I am not a good motion videographer, so expect that these will probably just look like all right. But I like them, so let's have a look. conclusion. So, in the end, shooting with the EOS M with Magic Lantern, it's a slow, methodical, and a bit buggy process with hurdles in between, just for fun. However, if you have an interest in shooting raw video, have patience, love to tinker, or aren't made out of money, this could be for you. There's still some excitement over this camera, so the EOS M prices aren't that low, but to be fair, they are not by any means that crazy. If you have a budget of around 175 USD, you can probably snag an EOS M body. That said, once you have said EOS M body, plan to spend a bit more money to rig it up the way you want to. Or, if you're like me, fire up a 3D printer. Plus, you'll probably also need to set money aside for lenses or adapters, depending on what you want to do. At any rate, I'll be 100% honest. When I got this camera, I didn't expect that I would like playing with the camera as much as I did. However, there were signs. I'm someone who generally likes to shoot raw. I like to tinker quite a lot, and I'm generally doing this kind of stuff just for fun. So, again, there were signs that I might like Magic Lantern. But I do want to emphasize again, I'm no video bro. This was all a lot of learning for me, and I enjoyed that immensely. All right, one last point I want to discuss about the EOS M. I wanted to talk about the hype. Is the hype around this camera justified? In the end, I think actually mostly yes. It is really an incredible tool to have, and the video that comes out of this is kind of just nuts. But what I don't think is 100% justified are the occasional articles that you read saying things like EOS M, it could record 5.2K all along. Canon crippled it on purpose. That, I personally think, is a big stretch. And I know, it's meant to be clickbaity, but if you use Magic Lantern, you will learn pretty quickly that, yes, as much as Canon likes the cripple hammer, and they like it, when it comes to this facet of the camera, there's a lot, like a huge amount, that went into the community at the Magic Lantern forums and groups or whatever, that just poured a lot of work into making this camera the way it is. And by just implying that Canon turned it off, discounts just how much work went into Magic Lantern to get it to where it is today. So yes, the hype is real. No, Canon didn't just hammer the camera into the state that it originally shipped in. At any rate, that's all I got. Have any of you played with Magic Lantern? Do you like it? And if you haven't played with it, would you consider using it or installing it on your Canon camera? As always, let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Maybe a super thanks if you're into that. Till next time, bye.